So Jay, great to have you here today. Can you introduce yourself in the way you prefer?
So Jay Bevington, so I obviously work for Deloitte, been working for Deloitte now for 16 years, and I support senior leaders to ultimately to have a positive impact with their own teams, with their organisations, and with their stakeholders.
Great, thank you. Can you tell us what do you always take when you travel?
I travel a lot, right? I'm sure you'll appreciate. To be honest, I turned 50, which you're not going to believe. I know.
No.
It's just so I turned 50 last year, and for the first time, bearing in mind I've been doing kind of management consultancy work for 25 years. The first time I bought some Tumi luggage, and now I will not go anywhere on this planet without it. I treated myself, and if I have one regret in life, it's like, why on earth did I wait until 50 years of age?
Great. What can we find in your YouTube history?
My YouTube, well, I mean, so I enjoy. So YouTube for me is a little bit more kind of personal and sort of downtime, right? So I do like a lot of TED Talks. I watch a lot of TED Talks, but that's obviously a little bit more kind of business related. So in my personal YouTube history, you'll find a lot of comedy. So I love a good comic. Especially some of the kind of British comics. I've also got into whiskey and investing in whiskey. So especially English whiskey, which isn't hopefully an oxymoron. So I do a lot of kind of research on best whiskies to buy and things like that. So that's my YouTube.
Interesting.
Cool. You gave us an introduction from your own perspective for what you do. How do your family, noting that your kids are now past teens, how would your family describe what you do?
So I don't know if this translates internationally, but in the UK we have this phrase, big wig. So my family will say that, Dad, he just talks to big wigs all day. So big wigs are obviously kind of senior.
I thought they were going to label you as that.
Yeah, well, no, definitely not. So Dad talks to big wigs in industry and clients, and obviously senior folk. But it's interesting that's all they think I do, which is talk, right? Talk all day, which as an extrovert isn't too bad an outcome, I guess.
Yeah. Perfect. We want to talk a bit about business chemistry, and in our language, business chemistry, using science to improve the art of business relationships. So I know you spent a lot of time on this. Well, I've got a cue as well. That's a bit of it. So I haven't learned it off. I love it, but not to the extent of learning it off by heart. You're heavily involved in this and have been for a number of years or so. Could you just describe business chemistry from your perspective, but also where you sit within that quadrant of the four traits?
No, sure. So I've used business chemistry hundreds of times. We use it with boards. We use it with senior top teams, and if you have a division or a business unit that's having, say, a town hall, we'll do it with everybody there. So for example, last October, we did one with 160 people in Aqaba. So obviously business chemistry is it's an online tool that gives everybody their own bespoke tailored report. At its heart, business chemistry allows us to understand our own and one another's work preferences, but it does it from a behavioural perspective, right? So it's not hugely introspective. We're not examining, one's soul or one's relationship with, mother-in-law or father-in-law, right? It's not that deeply analytic, and deliberately so. Very behavioural, very interactional, very practical, right? And the people we use it with, both internally within Deloitte, but also with our clients, just love it, right? We get so many requests for it, and obviously Doogie Harep in Dubai here does a great job as well doing it. Now, in terms of obviously just a quick going round, so there are 4 preferences, as you said. We have our pioneers, which are our kind of creative types, our innovators, tend to be a bit more strategic, extroverted, they join the dots. We then have our drivers, very results orientated, very analytical, often quite competitive as well as people. We have our guardians that are quite process orientated, very structured, risk sensitive, risk aware, and can quite often be more kind of quiet and more introverted. Then finally we have our integrators. So our integrators are people, so they're very empathic, great with teams, and enjoy being with people. Well, in my case, possibly could have worked it out already, but so I'm a pioneer integrator. I'm actually very strong on both of those 2 traits. My driver and my guardian, much less so. I guess when I look for evidence to support that, I was the first back in 2008 when I joined Deloitte. I was the first non-accountant to be appointed into the audit practice, and I was the first clinical psychologist, I think, to be appointed by Deloitte UK. So that was Deloitte being, if you like, taking a bit of a risk of being innovative with me, and obviously vice versa.
Absolutely. On that, can people change? Because your traits tend to stay grounded and rooted.
Once a week. It's my, I almost wake up in the morning like, can people change? So look, I mean, I think we need to be clear about business chemistry, right? So as a psychologist, I know it isn't a psychometric tool, right? So what do I mean by that? I mean that we've got tests of reliability and validity. Obviously reliability is will you get the same result time and time again, or relatively the same result? And validity is around, does it actually measure what it purports to measure, right? So business chemistry, we've never put it through a battery of psychometric tests. We've never gone deep on statistical analysis with it, right? And that's quite deliberate. We want it to be a helpful tool, a practical tool. We don't want it to be an assessment tool, right? But to get to your question, Rich, I mean, it is, people, of course, can change, right? What we find is, we were debating before, or we were talking before the start of this about people on borders, right? So I'm quite clearly a pioneer with a secondary as an integrator. Now there are people that would sit on the border between pioneer and integrator. So they might take the assessment 1 year, come out pioneer, might take the assessment another year and come out as integrator, right? So we do see change when people are on the borders of business chemistry. We don't see profound change, right? So we don't see I'm off the scale driver. I'm 1% on my integrator. You'd never see a flip like, oh, I'm suddenly an integrator because decided that I was going to be a nice guy or whatever, right? So there isn't that level of change. So it's marginal, marginal.
But my understanding is that you have a little bit of everything, and you can activate those
Totally.
profiles.
Yeah, totally right, and thank you for mentioning that. So absolutely, so we're all 4 of the types. I think we struggle as Deloitte to kind of name them. I use the word traits or dimensions, but the four aspects of business chemistry, we are all 4 of those. We have all 4 of those. What we're looking at with the tool is our natural preference. Mm-hmm. So if we were left to our own devices, how would we behave? How would we interact? Now, that's not to say that a pioneer can't be a guardian, for example. I have to be guardian every time I fill out a tax return or whatever, right? So we can of course behave consistent with the opposite of our particular preference. So it's definitely not about skills or abilities. It's not about right or wrong. It's just about we as human beings, we have a natural way of operating and behaving, and we need to be mindful of that. We need to recognize that.
Can you tell us a little bit your career storyline, and as well how you became a partner, like your route to become a partner?
My route to becoming a partner. So I got so just quickly, I'll give you the executive yes. summary version. So some people may know, I don't know, but so I originally qualified as a clinical psychologist, which is still to this day quite unusual. There's not a lot. Well, A, there's not a lot of clinical psychologists, and B, there's even less that leave the profession. Right. So the profession being treating people with with mental health issues. So I left the profession back in sort of '99. I then spent some time as a football agent. So I was, before you ask, because I know you will. So I married the guy's sister. So he's my brother-in-law. So back in '99, 2000, he was Premier League footballer, do very well, played for England. Then unfortunately got into a very, very bad road accident in Rome, and that kind of pretty much sort of unfortunately, tragically ended his career. And spent a bit of time in industry, then PwC, and then Deloitte from 2008. But I've always worked with boards and with senior teams. That's been me since 2002, 2003. And I was I think looking back, and I think it's important that we all do this, right? I think looking back on my career, I see people that have been very good to me, and I also see luck, right place, right time. So back in the sort of 2000s, obviously in the UK, it was the Tony Blair administration and Labour. And Labour had this, I thought, fantastic vision for NHS organisations to develop greater leadership, greater governance, and with that greater autonomy and greater freedom. And they developed a process called Foundation Trust status, which was equivalent at the time to becoming listed on the London Stock Exchange. So it's a very, very business, commercially driven process, very robust process. That was a very, very proud moment for me, because you're enabling a whole organisation to be better, right? To really demonstrably raise their game, and that helped me. We were the number one in the market. 70% of our work was single tender. When we did go out to the competition, we would win. So we had something ridiculous, like a 98% win rate. And that just propelled me through to partner. So.
Pretty traditional story, clinical psychologist, football agent, through Deloitte, through the ranks, through to partner. If I meet another partner that hasn't been through that similar thing.
And Colette's whiskey, right? What's that about? I mean, it's just all a bit weird, right?
What's the biggest risk that you've taken at Deloitte?
Oh, that's a great question. I hate people that say that. You hear that all the time. That's a great question. That's basically, let me think about that question, because I'm not entirely sure I've got a nice, neat answer. Do you know, if I'm really honest, and I know this is going to sound a little bit, I don't know, maybe a bit trite, but we at Deloitte, we have our purpose is very clearly stated, and it has been for a number of years. And our purpose is to have an impact that matters, right? This, to me, was like my calling card. I was like, this is exactly the business I want to be in. This for me is what I aspire to do every single day with clients, right? So that for me, it just makes so much sense. It's in my DNA, right? This whole every day, what are you doing to have that, I think, personal impact that matters, right? With an individual leader, with a colleague in Deloitte. Now, I'll answer your question. Certainly not here, since I've been in the Middle East, but when I was in the UK, we developed a business that was market leading, right? And because of that, the regulators, the shareholders, governments, Westminster, would come to us and say, we're really worried about this board. On occasion, we're really worried about this chief executive, right? Can you do an independent review of this governing body or this individual, right? Now, and we would always, every single time, we operated with integrity at all times. So evidence-based reporting, we would be fair, we would be balanced, we would be proportionate. But we would end up writing reports that often meant, because if somebody's asking you to do an independent review, it's because they're worried. And if they're worried, it's because they've got evidence to make them worried, right? So we would often end up in a situation where we would be writing quite critically about people. And there's a whole process called the Salomon process that I won't bore you with, but there's a kind of legal process around that. So there were various times when I felt I was doing the right thing. I was trying to have an impact that matters. If it was an NHS organisation and the government was worried, you'd be hopefully having a positive impact on the patients and taxpayers. If it was a bank, it could be shareholders, whatever. You were always motivated to do the right thing, but that sometimes would put me, particularly personally, into the firing line of I remember once being on the M6 motorway, stuck in a traffic jam. Traffic jam hadn't moved for an hour, right?
Right, for our international listeners, that links Manchester to...
So M6 is basically the West Coast, right? So all the way, I think, from Birmingham all the way to Glasgow, right? So huge route. Anyway, I was stuck on a place called Shap in Cumbria, so the highest point on the motorway. And I remember looking at I think it was an iPhone. It was a number of years ago, and I had an email from our then chief executive David Sproul, copying in our lawyer, and it said, "Hi Jay, could you please look into this for me?" And it was a 38-page letter from a solicitor who was representing a CFO, Chief Finance Officer, because we'd just done a financial governance review of this particular organisation, right? And it was 38 pages of emotion, 38 pages of it's everybody else's fault. And what the Salomon process teaches you is that you've got to give people the right to comment, but it's got to be factual, right? They've got to send you back facts. Unfortunately, this 38 pages did not have any facts in it, so we didn't change our report. But I remember thinking at the time, this is starting to feel high risk, right? We are doing the right thing, and I must say the firm has never waned in its support. The firm has been awesome, and the legal department, obviously the then CEO David, and all various other people, right? So I think there was a view that we are doing the right thing, and sometimes we do have to do these reviews that might put us into harm's way. But that, for me, started to feel a little bit risky, right?
Yeah.
And
How are you sleeping at the time?
and so I did.
Soundly.
It's I think I probably lost a night's sleep on that particular occasion, right? And then you get but so sorry, that was a very long way of answering what was a very good question. So I think I've answered it from a kind of personal risk perspective, even though actually in reality I always knew the firm was there to support me. So it's more of an emotional thing rather than a intellectual thing, because we've done we always did a great job, and we always were so meticulous in terms of the conclusions we drew and making sure we had multiple data points. So I knew in a court of law it would stand up, no issue, but that doesn't necessarily help on the emotional side of things, right? So,
Absolutely.
Well, we'll make our last question equally personal then, but I'll just flip it around the other way. So definitely want a personal answer, not a corporate answer on this. What's your proudest achievement within the firm so far? I say so far because I'm sure there's a...
Yeah, whatever. Do you know what? I think I'm not saying this just because I'm in your company, right? I mean that. So I think the work we've been doing together with Deloitte Private, obviously under Scott's overall sponsorship and ultimately global sponsorship as well. What it's enabled me to do is put onto paper what has been rattling around my head for a few years, right? So my proudest moment to date, I think, is when we've written, as you know, we've written six articles now, 5 of which are directly related to boards and board impact and board effectiveness. The partnership board articles that we've published are being used extensively throughout our network, our Deloitte network. So they're being used by the global board, they're being used by our member firm boards and our geography boards. And that's kind of a proud moment for me. And the board, when Sharon Thorne was global chair, we published an article, 2 years ago maybe, on board impact. And that was for a kind of corporate audience. And that is being used in the education of MBA students at Harvard Business School, right? So, and I think it's probably, listen to this, you could take away an egotistical story, and it's 100% not that. I'm not interested in, that's the article that Jay wrote. It's about, if we go back to, again, our purpose and having an impact that matters, that impact can come through, we're hugely privileged to do the work that we do, right? Hugely privileged. And that work gives us insights, it gives us learning, and all we've done with our work is just put that onto paper. And we've had help, right? John Dewey's been awesome. So there's been an awesome team around us. But we've now got publications that are enabling people to think and operate differently, and I think that's a huge privilege, right?
So legacy, Jay, obviously a huge theme within the region, and I guess everyone that you're working with from there. What's the legacy that you want to leave behind?
So I think,
not suggesting that's rapidly impending, but
it
when
could
it
be.
does come.
Hey, listen, I mean, who knows? So legacy for me, I think we've talked about the publications, and I think those are, for me, I think those are key. And the fact that we've gone global with, local has gone global. So we've got now 6 articles that are being repurposed for local marketplaces across the world, which I think is pretty awesome. We probably know we get a lot from the US, Deloitte US. It's nice to nice to give something back, right? So, but I think there's a second point about legacy, which is about, we call it different things, but sense of or spirit of partnership. You know, I think I had the very good fortune to be in London a couple of weeks ago, where I led a workshop facilitated a workshop with our global board and with something called our community of chairs, which is all the chairs from worldwide, Deloitte chairs worldwide. So there's about 45 people. And we had a whole workshop on the importance of sense of partnership. And I think we believe that sense of partnership is a competitive advantage. I think it's our superpower, if I'm honest. You know, people that join Deloitte at partner level from other firms often comment on our sense of partnership. So I think coming back to legacy, I'd like people to think, you know, Jay operated or operates with that sense of partnership. So, you know, he's collaborative, he's straight, you know, he's honest, he's transparent, he's always got the clients at the forefront of his mind, and he's always got bringing the best of the firm to whatever client situation. So yeah, I think that's an important legacy for me.
Yeah, love it. And he's good company over a dinner, and he's very tall.
Yes, that's it.
Where can people find more about you and the work that you've referenced and the articles that you've written recently?
So I think, well, obviously they can always contact me. They can contact you guys. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if people aren't connected with me, please do so. Obviously we publish a lot through that medium, and people can pick up those publications that way. If it's internal, there's obviously the Deloitte website as well. But always happy to talk to folk and to have a conversation with people. Yeah, no problem whatsoever.
Jay, maybe just to conclude, is there a resource, could be a podcast, a video, a book, a movie that you have watched recently that you would encourage people to look at it?
Wow, that's a good... I mean, there's some great TED Talks, right? I think I said at the start. So TED Talks, there's two actually. There's two that I use a lot in our client work. One by Amy Edmondson, who has pioneered a lot of work. She's a Harvard Business School professor, and she's pioneered a lot of work on psychological safety. And she talks about the power of humility and the power of intellectual curiosity, and having that mindset. Effectively, other people have talked about a growth mindset, but having that mindset, you can really start to solve world problems. So I think that just Amy Edmondson TED Talk, it will come up, right? It's one of the most popular. And there's also a TED Talk by an academic called Margaret Heffernan, and she talks about super chickens, and she uses an example, and I won't give all the story, but effectively, a biologist bred two sets of chickens, and in the second set, sort of effectively bred them to almost have the best chickens in that particular group. They then took the best layers. They then what's the word I'm looking for? Bred. I think it's bred. Bred them with the other best layers. And anyway, before long, after about 3 or 4 generations, they effectively all killed one another, right? And her story is about the fact that competition amongst people, the fact that egos, the fact that always going for the superstar ultimately ends in disaster, and that actually taking relatively straightforward teams and working on things like a culture of helpfulness, a culture of connectivity, so encouraging people to be with one another, spend time together, how that can then lead to all kinds of productivity gains and positive workplace mental health gains as well. So I think that TED Talk is particularly brilliant. So there's probably two, I'd say, that have influenced me over the last few years.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Purpose of today, I guess, really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for being so open. Our purpose was just to help ourselves and our audience just get to know you as an individual a little better. And I really appreciate the time and the
That's
conversation.
great. Fantastic being in Dubai.
Thank you.
Awesome.